It's the third hijacking this week involving Beirut, and this time the plane and most of the passengers are from the United States.
While many of us were watching news and sporting events on network television during the 1970s and 80s, Frank Quitoni was traveling the world, helping to shape the way news and sports were covered and broadcast by the networks. It was a path he seemed destined for from childhood.
My parents gave me my first box camera, and I used to run around the neighborhood taking pictures. I never really knew that that was going to amount to anything other than I really enjoyed it, and I drove my parents crazy doing it.
As a young man, he received an electrical engineering degree from the RCA Institute in New York. Not long after, he was drafted into the military.
When I got out of the military, I went to ABC and interviewed for a job, and lo and behold, my first job became at ABC Sports.
He joined the Monday Night Football production team and quickly caught the attention of the broadcast's creator, Roone Arledge.
The relationship that I had with Roone Arledge really began to drive my career. He brought me over to ABC News with a small team of us from sports.
At the time, Arledge was the president of ABC Sports. Today, he's a legend and considered the author of sports broadcasting. In 1977, his success in sports led to the dual role of president of ABC News. Part of his plan to improve the news division involved building news bureaus worldwide.
Because of my engineering background as well, he assigned me the task of figuring out, designing how we could build news bureaus around the world.
Under Arledge's direction, Frank helped ABC break new ground in news content as well. Barbara Walters became the first American to interview Fidel Castro in Cuba. Frank was a member of the crew that accompanied her. When Pope Paul VI died in 1978, Frank was called back from a vacation and sent to Rome to provide pool coverage for all the networks of the papal funeral and the following election. ABC's combined effort with the Italian television network taught him that broadcasters in Italy did things a little differently.
We were waiting for the smoke to change colors, and it was getting around lunchtime, and the head of the Italian television network came into our production compound and said, "We're shutting down and going to lunch." I said, "You're shutting down and going to lunch?"
Concerned that they would miss the signal of a new pope, he and the ABC crew set up their own camera. Less than 30 minutes after the Italian crew returned from a 2.5-hour lunch, white smoke emerged from the chimney, the Italian crew chief explained.
He said, "When we go to lunch," he's pointing to himself, and then he pointed over to the Vatican, he said, "They go to lunch."
In 1980, Frank was in France when he was called to help with ABC's coverage of the Olympics in Lake Placid. From there, he was promoted to general manager and director of electronic news gathering at ABC. He returned to Vietnam in the 1980s with Ted Koppel. The ABC crew was the first to provide live post-war news broadcasts from that region. Some situations were dangerous, like the hijacking of TWA Flight 847 in the summer of 1985. Frank was on the tarmac when the pilot, while being held at gunpoint, was permitted to speak with journalists.
Do they speak English? Can you communicate with them?
Sometimes better than others. It depends on who's on board.
You almost feel like there is a wall between you and the incident. You don't really think you can get hurt by looking through the camera lens. We all know that's not true.
Frank credits his years at ABC with preparing him to compete in his own business ventures. In the late 1980s, in the midst of running a production facility in St. Louis and pursuing the purchase of a number of television and radio stations with 3 business partners, he received a call asking for help from a friend and former ABC colleague, now at CBS.
CBS bought the Olympics, the '92 Olympics in France, and they don't have anybody here that knows anything about putting anything of that size together.
Most people would have politely declined. Frank, however, while continuing to work with his business partners, also accepted the role of Director of Operations for CBS in Albertville, France. To say that his efforts were successful is an understatement. Frank garnered an Emmy for technical achievement.
We designed and had companies design miniature cameras, and we put them in places that nobody would ever. At that time, the cameras didn't exist.
He repeated that success with a second Emmy win, this time as a consultant for CBS's 1994 Winter Olympic broadcasts. Throughout it all, he remained true to his business partners.
By 1996, we had 7 TV stations and 25 radio stations.
River City Broadcasting, the company the partners grouped the stations into, was sold that year in a record deal.
And at that time, it was one of the biggest media sales ever.
And although their business was now behind them, their relationships were not.
One of the investors that got us started at River City Broadcasting had invested money in Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
He asked Frank to determine the value of Fox 8 and ABC 23 in Johnstown in anticipation of a sale. Then another of the River City partners called.
He said, hey, how about you and I buying the TV stations in Johnstown?
With a little convincing, Frank not only agreed to invest, he also made a commitment to move to Johnstown for 5 years. 18 years later, he still has passion for his work and is enjoying an added benefit.
The relationships I developed in Johnstown.
His initial goal was to improve the stations. Achieving that goal resulted in meeting local business leaders and forming relationships. Those relationships flourished and resulted in invitations to serve the community, first as a member of the board at Conemaugh Memorial Medical Center, and then in 2011 as chairman, and as a member of the board at St. Francis University beginning in 2010. To Frank, this is a much greater reward than the business success he enjoys.
To continue to invest back into the community, that's really what it's all about. And I'm just to be just a little piece of it makes me want to get up every morning and continue to do it.
From a kid with a camera to a network news and sports pioneer, an Emmy Award winner, a television station owner and executive, and now a Business Hall of Fame laureate in the community he's proud to be a part of, Johnstown.